You're standing in a room filled with more gold than most kingdoms will ever see. But you're not here to spend it. You're here because the men behind you want you to understand something. This gold, stacked in towers, gleaming in lamplight, untouched while your city burned. This is why you're about to die. February 1258. The Caliph of Baghdad walks through his own treasury for the last time. The guards aren't his. The silence isn't respect. And in 3 hours, he'll be dead in a way so deliberate, so symbolically brutal, that rulers 1,000 miles away will hear the story and open their gates without a single arrow being fired. Before we go deeper, I'd love to know where in the world you're watching this from. Drop a comment with your country. It genuinely amazes me that a story from 767 years ago still reaches across continents, still makes us wonder what we would have done in that moment. This is the story of how an empire ended, not with a battle, but with a carpet. How a city that had survived 5 centuries fell in 13 days. And how the Mongols turned execution into a language every throne room in the world would learn to read. Baghdad in 1257 wasn't just a city, it was the beating heart of human knowledge itself. For 500 years, this place had been where Greek philosophy collided with Persian astronomy, where Indian mathematics fused with Islamic scholarship. The House of Wisdom held manuscripts that would take 3 lifetimes to read. Al-Khwarizmi had invented algebra here. Ibn al-Haytham had written the first true work on optics within these walls. Scholars traveled from Cordoba to Samarkand just to study in libraries that cataloged everything humanity had learned about medicine, mechanics, the motion of stars. The city's population exceeded 1 million. Its underground canal systems were engineering marvels. Its hospitals treated patients regardless of faith or wealth. This wasn't a civilization in decline. This was a civilization at its operational peak. And ruling over all of it, Caliph al-Mustasim. Not just a king, not just a political figure, the spiritual successor to Muhammad himself, a man whose legitimacy stretched back through 37 generations. When he spoke with the weight of divine authority. But authority and power are not the same thing. Al-Mustasim had inherited a title that still commanded religious reverence across the Islamic world. He had also inherited an army of mercenaries, governors who barely obeyed him, and a treasury so full it had never been spent on defense, because Baghdad had always survived through prestige, through negotiation, through the sheer gravitational pull of being the center of everything. So when reports arrived in 1256 about horsemen in the east, horsemen who had erased the Khwarezmian Empire, who had depopulated entire Persian cities, who didn't stop at rivers or mountains or negotiated borders, Baghdad took note and did nothing. The Mongols weren't an army, they were a system. By the time Hülegü Khan turned his attention westward in 1253, the Mongol military machine had been refined over 50 years of continuous warfare across terrain that ranged from frozen steppe to desert to mountain passes no one thought could be crossed. Genghis Khan had left behind something unprecedented, not just conquered territory, but a replicable military doctrine that turned warfare into predictable process. Every target received the same sequence. First, envoys arrive. They present terms in writing. Submit immediately. Send tribute. Provide hostages, usually the sons of rulers. Accept Mongol governance. Compliance means survival. Your walls stay standing. Your markets stay open. Your people live. Refusal triggers nothing immediate. No threats, no ultimatums. Just silence. Weeks pass, sometimes months. The city continues its routines. Defenders begin to think maybe the Mongols were bluffing. Maybe they moved on to easier targets. And then the horizon fills with horsemen. What made the Mongols terrifying wasn't just their skill in battle. It was their patience. They didn't attack out of anger. They attacked out of process. When walls collapsed, infantry moved through in coordinated units. When gates broke, cavalry secured routes in geometric patterns. Cities fell in sections like surgical cuts. And once inside, the population was divided with clinical precision. Artisans identified and spared. Engineers identified and spared. Scholars identified and spared. Everyone else gathered in fields outside the city. What happened in those fields was documented by multiple sources, and it wasn't random violence. It was systematic elimination designed to leave just enough survivors to tell the story. By 1257, Hülegü had already applied this system across Persia. Nishapur had refused. Its population was eliminated. Merv, once called the city the world depends on, had resisted. Systematically depopulated. Every ruined city became a textbook for the next one. And now Hülegü turned toward the greatest prize between Persia and Egypt. September 1257. 3 Mongol riders arrived at Baghdad's gates, carrying a single letter. You have heard what has befallen the cities of Persia. You know the cost of refusal. Present yourself at our camp. Submit to the authority of the great Khan. Dismantle your fortifications. Send your sons as hostages. Do this, and your city will be spared. Refuse, and you will learn what the others learned. The letter arrived on a Thursday. By Friday, the Caliph's court had fractured. His vizier, Ibn al-Alqami, laid out the evidence with brutal clarity. The Khwarezmian Empire had fielded 400,000 soldiers. They had mountain fortresses, all of it gone. Nishapur's walls had been 30 feet thick, all of them rubble. These are not raiders, Ibn al-Alqami said. This is a military system refined across 50 years. We cannot fight them. We can only survive them. He recommended immediate submission, full tribute, opening the gates before the siege began. The head of Baghdad's army disagreed. The Mongols were steppe cavalry. They excelled in open terrain. Baghdad's walls had never been breached. They have no experience with siege warfare against prepared defenses, he argued. They can't maintain a long siege this far from their supply base. A third faction invoked theology. Baghdad was the seat of the Caliphate. God would not allow pagans to destroy the house of the Prophet's lineage. Al-Mustasim listened. He was 54 years old. He had ruled for 16 years. He had never faced a military crisis remotely like this. Contemporary sources describe him as fond of luxury, devoted to scholarship, deeply uncomfortable with military matters. He looked at the letter. He looked at his advisors. We are the Caliphate, he said. We do not submit to threats from horsemen. The envoys were dismissed. No tribute would be sent. No preparations would be made. What followed was more telling than the refusal itself. The Caliph didn't mobilize the army. He didn't reinforce the walls. He didn't open the treasury. He simply continued his routine, as if the threat would dissolve through inaction. 300 miles to the east, Hülegü's army began moving. November 11, 1257. Mongol scouts appeared 30 miles east of Baghdad. Baghdad's military commander saw opportunity. If the Mongol force was small and isolated, they could destroy it in open terrain. A decisive victory would discourage further advance. On November 13th, Baghdad's army marched east. 20,000 men, 12,000 cavalry, 8,000 infantry. The largest force the Caliphate had assembled in decades. November 15th, the armies met. Baghdad's cavalry charged the Mongol line. What happened next was recorded by the few survivors who made it back. The Mongol line retreated, not in panic, but in perfect coordination. Baghdad's cavalry pursued. 1 mile, 2 miles. The retreat continued, still organized. Then the flanks appeared. Mongol cavalry units that had been hidden in gullies to the north and south emerged simultaneously. Baghdad's cavalry found itself surrounded, not by the 4,000 horsemen they'd been chasing, but by 15,000. What followed wasn't a battle. It was dismantling. Mongol composite bows could punch through armor at 200 yards while the riders were at full gallop. Baghdad's formations disintegrated. Officers shouted orders that couldn't be heard. By nightfall, of the 20,000 men who had marched out, fewer than 3,000 returned. Baghdad's field army no longer existed. Not routed, not scattered, erased. When news reached the court, the nature of the situation finally became clear. This wasn't a raiding party. This had been a trap. The Mongols had used a small detachment as bait and eliminated Baghdad's entire military capability with surgical precision. By December, the main Mongol force was visible on the horizon, and all that remained were walls. January 11, 1258. The Mongol army completed its encirclement. 150,000 soldiers, fortified camps at every gate, supply lines stretching back to Persia. Escape became impossible. But what happened next was more psychologically devastating than the siege itself. The Mongols began assembling siege engines in full view of the walls. Chinese engineers worked alongside Mongol soldiers. Trebuchets were built with geometric precision, designed to throw stones weighing 300 pounds. Baghdad's defenders watched the construction day after day. They could see exactly what was being prepared. They could calculate exactly what it would do to their 500-year-old walls. On January 17th, Hülegü sent another embassy. The terms had changed. The time for full submission has passed. But the Caliph may still preserve his life. Open the gates. Present yourself. Order your garrison to disarm. Do this within 3 days and the population will be spared. The Caliph convened his advisors. The pragmatic vizier recommended acceptance. We have no field army. We have no allies. We have no way to withstand this. The religious scholars still invoked divine protection. The Caliph hesitated. 3 days passed. No response was sent. January 29th, dawn. The trebuchets began firing.
Randomly?
Not for intimidation. Systematically, the Mongol engineers had spent 2 weeks calculating wall thickness, structural weak points, optimal impact angles. Stone projectiles struck the same sections repeatedly. Each impact created microfractures in stonework that had stood for 5 centuries. The bombardment continued for 8 hours, then stopped. The Mongols waited. Overnight, the damaged sections weakened further under their own weight. The next day, the bombardment resumed on the same spots. February 5th, the eastern wall collapsed. Section 90 feet wide simply disintegrated. Mongol infantry moved toward the breach, not charging, walking in formation. They entered Baghdad in units, secured the breach, established a perimeter, advanced block by block. Baghdad's remaining garrison tried to hold. They were outnumbered, outmaneuvered, outfought. By nightfall, the Mongols controlled the eastern quarter of the city. On February 10th, the Caliph sent a final message to Hülegü's camp. I will surrender personally. I will open the gates. I will order my garrison to disarm. Spare the city. Hülegü's response arrived within hours. Present yourself at my camp tomorrow. Lone. February 13th, 1258. The Caliph walked out of Baghdad. He didn't come alone. He brought 3,000 members of his court, his sons, his ministers, his scholars, his generals. They walked through the gate unarmed. Mongol guards flanked them immediately, not threatening, just present. The procession moved through the camp in silence. Soldiers watched. No insults, no violence, just observation. Hülegü received the Caliph in his command tent. His first question was practical. Where is your treasury? The Caliph hesitated. We are prepared to offer tribute. Where is it? The Caliph provided directions. Hülegü sent soldiers to verify. 3 hours later, they returned. The vault was open. Gold ingots. Thousands of them. Silver coins in countless chests. Jewels accumulated over generations. Silk enough to clothe an army. Hülegü ordered the entire treasury documented. Then he ordered the Caliph brought there. The Caliph was escorted back into his own city, now controlled by Mongol soldiers. Past buildings beginning to smolder. To his own treasury. The doors were open. Hülegü walked him through it. Room by room, vault by vault. They didn't speak. But the question didn't need to be asked. Why was this wealth sitting here while your walls crumbled? Why were these coins in storage while your soldiers went unpaid? Why was this gold locked away while your city prepared for nothing? What happened next is reported differently across sources. The Persian historian Rashid al-Din records that Hülegü ordered the Caliph to eat his gold to consume the wealth he'd valued more than his people's survival. Whether that literally occurred is debated. What's documented is what followed. The Mongols followed Tengirist spiritual beliefs. One of their core taboos, royal blood must not touch the ground. Spilling it directly brings cosmic imbalance. So when executing nobility, alternatives were required. For the Caliph, they chose a specific method. He was wrapped in a carpet, tightly, completely, arms bound, legs immobilized. Then laid on the ground outside the treasury. Horses were brought forward. The horses didn't trample randomly. They were led slowly, deliberately across the wrapped figure. Repeatedly, the weight crushed the body inside the carpet. No blade was drawn. No executioner announced judgment. No formal proclamation was made. When it ended, the Caliph was dead. No blood had touched the earth. The taboo was satisfied. But something else had been created. A method that would be discussed in every court from Anatolia to Delhi. A death that carried meaning beyond mere execution. The Caliph's sons were separated from the court group. All of them. They were executed the same day. Some accounts say wrapped and crushed, others say killed out of sight. What doesn't vary? All died, no heirs survived. The Caliph's daughters were taken. Some sources mention them distributed among Mongol officers. Others say they were sent east. After February 13th, they disappear from detailed historical record. The 3,000 who had walked out with the Caliph were divided. Those with useful skills, engineers, physicians, administrators, were spared and sent to Mongol service. The rest were executed outside the city. The Abbasid dynasty, 500 years of continuous rule, ended that day. No succession occurred. No heir escaped. The family line that traced back through 37 generations was severed, and the news began spreading before the bodies were cold. After the Caliph's death, Hülegü gave Baghdad to his soldiers. For 13 days, the Mongol army divided the city into sectors. Each unit was assigned specific districts. They moved systematically, building by building. Anyone with demonstrable skills was separated and removed to camps outside the city. Valuables were collected and catalogued. Everyone remaining was moved outside the walls. Estimates of the death toll vary wildly. Contemporary sources claim anywhere from 200,000 to 1 million dead. Modern historians suggest the actual number was likely between 90,000 and 200,000. What's verified is the aftermath. The House of Wisdom burned. Manuscripts were thrown into the Tigris River. So many books that the river reportedly ran black with ink. The Grand Mosque was partially demolished. The Caliph's palace was razed. The canal system was deliberately damaged. Not random destruction. Deliberate infrastructure sabotage to ensure Baghdad couldn't quickly recover. February 20th, Hülegü ordered his army to withdraw. They left behind a city with entire neighborhoods erased, infrastructure damaged beyond repair, a population reduced by half at minimum. But they also left something else. Survivors, specifically, survivors who could tell others what they'd seen. Because the Mongols didn't want Baghdad erased from memory. They wanted it remembered. Within weeks, the story reached Damascus. Within months, Cairo. Within a year, every court from Anatolia to India knew exactly what had happened. Not just that Baghdad fell, but how. And what happened to the man who thought he was untouchable? Something shifted across the Islamic world. Cities that had been preparing resistance suddenly reversed course. Damascus opened its gates before the Mongols arrived. Aleppo sent tribute and hostages preemptively. Smaller emirates throughout Syria and Iraq submitted without seeing a single Mongol soldier. Because Baghdad hadn't just been destroyed, it had been demonstrated. Rulers performed the same calculation everywhere. Resist, face a siege you cannot win. Watch your city burn. Die wrapped in a carpet while your family is erased. Submit, retain your position, pay tribute, survive. The equation was clear. The Mongol expansion finally stopped in 1260 at the Battle of Anjalut, where the Mamluks of Egypt defeated a Mongol army in open combat. But even the Mamluks had learned from Baghdad. They didn't rely on walls. They didn't trust in sacred authority. They built their entire society around one purpose: creating a military force capable of stopping the Mongols in the field. They studied the Mongol system. They adapted elements of it. They prepared specifically for that confrontation because they understood what Baghdad hadn't. The Mongols weren't raiders you could wait out. They were a system you had to match. Baghdad survived, people returned. Markets reopened, but it never reclaimed its place. The House of Wisdom was gone, its knowledge scattered, its scholars dead and unreplaced. What endured was memory, the cost of defiance. Long after Hülegü, long after the Mongol Empire fractured, Baghdad's fall lived on. Chronicled, repeated, calculated in every court, weighing resistance. February 1258 wasn't just conquest. It was communication, written in smoke and bodiza, warning that traveled farther than armies. The Mongols didn't need to destroy every city. Only one, unforgettable enough to teach that titles don't stop tactics, and tradition doesn't stop siege engines. When asked why the Caliph wasn't killed by sword, a soldier replied, "A sword would have been justice. This was education." No one misunderstood.